Welcome everyone to Tips from the Field, producers making their way back into production. I hope you're all staying safe. And hopefully you've all downloaded from the PGA website our producers guidelines for working in non-studio environment. They're really great guidelines, include the protocols on how to get back to work safely, the top 10 things you need to think about when you're putting in your COVID safety plan, either to the unions or to your production companies, a green light document on how to decide whether you're going to go, whether you should go now, whether you should go now in the place that you're planning on shooting, a red light document, what happens if somebody tests positive while you're shooting, all the protocols to follow. There's a nice little flow chart to follow. And job descriptions of the health and safety supervisor and manager and all the differences there. And most importantly now, how to ventilate your shops, sets, production offices, and things like that, since we now know, confirmed by the CDC, that this is an airborne disease. So these documents are only possible by the great work of some of the people you see on the screen tonight, including Susan and Michelle from the PGA. Hello, Susan and Michelle. And others not with us, including the AP Council, who have given us numerous comments and revisions on these documents. And part of that task force is Harvey Wilson, Harvey wave, Gary Lucchese. I thought Kelly was on here, but I don't see her now. And the big thanks to Diana White, who helps run these Zoom seminars. Today, we have a big treat for you. The first half of today's hour and a half, so the first 45 minutes, we'll be concentrating on scripted projects, and we have two amazing guests for that. And the second half will be concentrating on unscripted. So let me get started and introduce you to our first two guests. First is John Skidmore, COO and head of production at Jax Media, doing shows like the Black Lady Sketch Show for HBO and First Wives Club at BET, and also several shows that stopped production and I think are restarting. So we're going to have John speak to that in a little while. Welcome, John. And Christine Vachon, co-founder of Killer Films. She's a producer of such films as Dark Waters, Shirley, and the upcoming film Zola, to be released by A24. Christine's currently in production in New York on the TV miniseries Halston for Netflix. And I think you're in the second week, is that right?
Well, we had been shooting, we'd shot about a third of it last March, February, March. So we're in the second week of the second startup.
Oh gosh, okay, so we're gonna get to that in a second. I wanna hear about that. And our third guest in the second half of Unscripted is Rasha Jakovich, CEO and co-founder of 44 Blue Productions. He does The Wahlburgers for A&E, Night Watch for A&E, Jailbirds for Netflix, and he has a dozen other shows in production right now. So it's gonna be exciting to hear from our guests. And I'd love to start with John. And can you tell us, what, have you started new productions? Were productions starting up from being shut down? And give us a few key learnings, what you'd do differently if you had to start all over.
Sure, yeah. We have a mix of different shows. We had some that were about to shoot that shut down right in March. And both those shows are either up and running or about to start. So Younger is in New York. It's on week 2, and Black Lady Sketch starts next Monday. And both those shows were days away from starting when the whole world shut down. So we basically had to re-prep all that stuff. Some of the scripts were adjusted. Some material was adjusted just to be more COVID friendly. Other stuff was adjusted for slower shoot schedule. And then we have a couple of new shows that sort of came out of the pandemic. We do a show called Wilmore on Peacock that is a weekly talk show with him and a few guests. And that was born out of a pandemic show we did called the Peacock Variety Show, which was all a home-based production early on in June and July in the pandemic, where before we had return to work protocols, so everyone shot at their homes. And out of that came the idea for Wilmore, which itself is shot on a stage, but with a very limited crew. I guess, what I found is that I'm so grateful there is a industry-wide return to work guidelines, because for many months there, we were sort of flying by the seat of our pants and doing, show by show guidelines, and it was constantly evolving. And thankfully now we have this doc, and while it's still evolving, it's just something that everyone can look to be like, this is how it's done. because we didn't have that resource. And while all the producers were working together and it was very harmonious and the studios were all in the same, we're all working with us to make sure that we did it safely. It's nice that those 11 or 13 weeks they did negotiating bore something out of it. Yeah, so my biggest takeaways are, I feel like it's what everyone thinks. It's slower, it costs more. Our findings are somewhere around 15 or 20% on both fronts. And we're doing a variety of different shows. We have younger as a mix of stage and location, but shows like Wilmore and The Conners, which I totally slipped my mind, it premieres tonight. We're shooting in LA, are stage-based shows, which are not, I won't use the word easier, but they're certainly more contained and less elements to deal with when you're not on location. So we sort of run the gamut of the different types of productions.
And did you, were you able to take advantage of insurance? Did that help you on the 2 shows that were in prep? Or did you have insurance to cover that restart?
That is all thankfully being dealt with on the network level right now. I mean, those conversations are way still ongoing about what's getting tagged in insurance, what reprep costs are tagged versus sunk costs. And I think that will be a fight for several months now amongst high level corporate people. But we're certainly, every show has a original budget and has a COVID budget, which contains reprep, COVID costs, HHS, all that stuff. And most, if not all the studios we're dealing with are treating them separately. So it's like, here's your budget to shoot it non-COVID and here's all the added costs. So that can be time, added days, new personnel, PPE, testing, cost of testing, all that goes in this COVID budget.
Got it. Thank you. And Christine, you were shaking your head about the different budgets. Are you finding the same average?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And you said a show started, shut down. You had 2 shutdowns. Is that what happened?
Just one shutdown. We started shooting Halston, I guess last February, and we had made it's a 5-episode miniseries, and we'd made it about a third of the way through when we were shut down, and so we are now, we've started back up, but we had to redo a lot of the things we did back in the late winter, early spring.
In terms of the scripts and reshooting scenes, actual scenes, or?
No, we're not reshooting anything. It's more just about, rescouting, reprepping, etc.
Got it. And are you going back into the same facilities where you were originally?
We are. I mean, I concur with everything that was said before me. I mean, we are a mix of practical locations and stage. We are a period film, a period show, so that has its own, kind of challenges. Look, I wouldn't say our show is particularly COVID friendly, but at the same time, what I've learned in the past couple of weeks is you can make any show COVID friendly. You just have to understand and sort of bake into what you do, what the protocols are. The protocols often shift a tiny bit, not in any big major way, but, like we had a day where it was all about the safety glasses, and then the next day it was all about the face shields. So that kind of thing shifts a little bit. The most challenging things in many ways are figuring out how do you deal with those like last minute that we're all used to decisions that a director wants to make about bringing on another piece of equipment, for example, or adding another, background player or two to a scene. And then you can't just do that because they haven't been tested. So that, really making sure that everyone sort of understands how much it limits your spontaneity. That's, I think, been one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I bet. And saying no to a director, it seems like such an easy request to get a few more people in the background. But if you don't have a pool standing by, then.
Right.
And how are you dealing with that in terms of, have you guys had, do you have a typical like set of, I did Madam Secretary, and we used to have like our kind of our regular background, but every week, we would bring in new players. We wrapped before this whole COVID thing started. Do you have like a bigger pool now of background actors that you keep on standby?
Are you asking me or John or
Yeah, either of you, if on a television series.
I honestly, for us, I couldn't even really tell you. I know that we are, because it's a period film, the background has to be fitted, and they can't just arrive on the day.
Right.
So it's tricky. It does mean those sort of like decisions that you are used to tweaking not at the last minute, but even a day or two. I mean, even 2 days beforehand isn't enough time. So that's been a real learning curve.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. We have on one of our shows, we have a group of background that we're keeping. We shoot in blocks. So it's 2 blocks, 20 days each. So we're doing one set of background for one block and another set for another block. But it definitely varies show to show, because that show can sort of work in fixed resources. Other shows, the background varies so much, because we have one show that has a lot of party scenes and have a ton of people, and then a lot of office scenes. So it is just what Christine's saying. It's just slower, and you got to take the spontaneity out. And in some ways it's nice in terms of like trying to shoot shorter days and actually having to prepare ahead of time, like how it should be.
Wow, surprise.
Take some adjusting.
I mean, I would also say, John, our director is really enjoying that there's so fewer people on set. I'm trying to figure out, there's so much less, so fewer.
Yeah.
So a radical way to say that. But he's really grooving on the fact that the set is really empty. And I think it is, and I'm like, this is only week 2. I feel like after the first day or two, which were reasonably chaotic, of nobody quite knowing what they were supposed to do or what they were supposed to have on, etc. And now that we're on like day 5 or 6, I feel like there is an efficiency on the set that's pretty cool.
That's great. And are you guys both trying to stick to 10-hour shooting days?
We're trying.
Yep, same here.
How's
We'll do
that going?
testing outside of that.
Testing outside of that, yes. And what's your testing protocol, John?
It is on most of the shows, it is per the guidelines, although on a few of the shows we do cast every day. So like at least 3 times a week for the cast. Like
Right.
Connors, for instance, they rehearse and shoot only 2 days a week.
Right.
Where they came for PPE, so we test them for both those days. But a show like Younger, we're doing 3 times a week with the cast.
Us too. And Younger's shooting in New York, right?
Correct. Yeah.
We're probably doing the same. I'm probably passing your testing tent.
That's right. That's right.
I did stand online on the wrong testing tent, like my first day.
Oh no.
They were like, we don't have your name. And I was like, oh, because I'm not with this show. Sorry.
That's the new getting into the wrong crew van. The wrong testing kit.
Exactly. And I mean, I like what you're saying, Christine, about the 10-hour day, because I feel like at least on the shows we're working on, people are starting to just get more, they're always on, they're liking getting home and maybe even having dinner with their families. So I'm hoping this is one of the things that kind of sticks around, post vaccine / COVID, that we become more efficient on set and can kind of help each other have our own lives outside of shooting.
Look, I think we would all love it. It's, we're still figuring out, the food of it all, my first day, I texted something to my partner in life, not my business partner, about like, oh, I'm wandering over to Crafty, and she was like, they still have craft services, and I was like, oh yes, not getting rid of that easily. But everything's, you know, pre-wrapped and you don't get it yourself, etc. And a lot of crew have come up to me to tell me that they prefer the boxed lunch.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, because they feel like they're not eating as much in a good way. They feel like they're, you know, and it feels a little bit more efficient. And anyway, I don't know.
And do they pre-order like
We
the day
pre-ordered the
before?
night before.
Yeah, okay. That's great.
I will say one more thing to what Christine was saying about the director liking the less crowded set. I did have a talent comment to me. We shot a show in July in LA. There was a studio-based show that had comedian panelists and dogs on. It was a dog competition show called Hot Dog. But her comment to me was, that was one of the first shows back in LA, and she was like, we were so efficient because when they called rap, no one, like, usually it went into chatter back in the day, but she was like, it was the quietest set I've ever been on. Like, they would call rap and the director could give me notes without having to like calm everyone down. And that helped them be as efficient as anything else because people weren't doing that stuff.
Yeah, the knock-on effects. That's so interesting. And Christine, do you guys, or John, do you do rolling lunches? How does it work?
I mean, one of the issues about breaking for lunch is how do you find a space big enough for people to be able, I mean, we've sort of been able to take advantage of the weather at the moment in New York, and so people can space out outside depending on the kind of set we have. We've tried to do rolling lunches, but the fact is, you know, there's just a certain segment of the crew that simply will never get a break. And it just doesn't seem fair to them. So because we're not sending people through the line, our lunch breaks are naturally shorter. So when we can figure out the space, we do break. Anyway, that's the look. I would love it if we could figure out a way to do, you know, French hours, rolling lunches, whatever you want to call it. This show, it doesn't feel like it's really feasible without really telling, you know, a big part of the crew that they just don't get to have a minute to eat their lunch.
Yeah, that's rough. That's really rough.
And we found the same with early on when, you know, before the protocols, we were floating all sorts of ideas, and obviously French hours was a big one. And that was the common refrain we heard, was just like, there's certain crew that just, it isn't feasible for them to stop. And it's a fair criticism. And we found the same thing on our show, which is just like, that's always be the detriment of rolling lunches, is the camera guys and those type of people. It's really hard to break away from set.
Right.
And have either of you dealt with any positive tests, and how did you handle them?
We have thankfully only had false positives on our shows. So we retested multiple times and it was fine. So we could tell it was false positive. We have had to like isolate and quarantine based on like common exposures of people, like people in their household or whatnot, either tested positive or were exposed. But thankfully the impact has been pretty minimal. I will say the zone system has been very effective in sort of limiting, you know, should that happen to a certain department, it's like, it helps us really limit the exposure of, you know, who who is exposed, and our ability to keep moving, you know, based on who tests positive and whatnot.
And we haven't, I mean, when we actually shut down back in March, in the whole chaos of shutting down, we had 2 cases on our set that caused a lot of, you know, stress and concern, but nobody was actually infected by those 2 cases that we know of. So, you know, it was at the time, you know, when, I mean, look, back in March, which feels like, 10 million years ago, we had we had a much smaller idea of how this disease was actually transmitted, and those were the days of like, mask and gloves and hysteria about the supermarket and Lysoling our Amazon packages, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the spirit in which we shut Halston down on March 13th. And when we found out that there were 2 people who, both of whom really had the disease pretty seriously, they both fine, it was really terrifying. So there was a couple weeks of true, everyone trying to, what did I sit next to them at lunch? Was I near them, et cetera?
Yeah. Before we were even worried about or thinking about who we might be in contact with.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. And how big are is your crew, Christine? Just for
1 gazillion people. I mean, it's a Netflix period miniseries. It's
a lot.
It's like probably about 120 people. I don't know off the top of my head, but that's typical.
And do you know how long it takes to get everyone through in the morning, like testing?
Well, it's different. I mean, and John, I assume it's the same for you. It's like everyone's on a slightly different protocol. So not everyone gets tested 3 times a week. You really only get tested 3 times a week if you're in direct contact with the cast. Otherwise, it's once or twice a week, and then it's all based on like where you are. So we're not testing 120 to 150 people a day. Depends who's on set. There's rapid testing pretty much every day for a different group of people.
And that's rapid PCR testing?
Well, no, it's the rapid, the PCR test is at this point not, is different from the rapid test that we do.
Got it. Is that the antigen test then? I'm trying to
No. It's a test that you administer for us.
Yeah.
You administer yourself and you get the results in 15 minutes, but it's still swab up the nostril, and it's slightly less effective than the PCR.
Got it. Okay. So you do that in addition to the regular PCR testing, just as
PCR once a week, rapid tests twice a week for us.
Yeah, it's the same cadence we've been doing on our shows. Simply because the PCR testing is a slower turnaround. So the rapid test gives you a quicker, though slightly less accurate.
Right.
Right. And that's and what are your turnaround times in New York approximately?
For the PCR?
PCR, yeah.
Around 24 hours, but we test every Monday, and I usually get the results, test Monday morning, get the results late afternoon Tuesday, but today I got them this morning. So maybe a little, but if we have to, as we had to shoot this past Saturday a little unexpectedly for reasons I won't bore you with. And not the whole crew was not available. So we had a couple of camera guys that we had to bring in, and we had to concierge test them with the PCR, meaning we could get the results very quickly, but it was more expensive. So.
And have you guys, on each of your shows, you have one lab that you've contracted with, or do you work with like a health and safety or a COVID compliance person that does that for you?
Speaking for our shows, we've worked with a few different labs. We always set it up through the COVID compliance team. We've mostly used a company called Axiom for that, which is a health safety company. They're like legit, like they clean up oil spills and open up meat processing factories. So they're not just film people. So we found them to be very helpful. It's medical professionals, and then we pair them with production people. But yeah, they sort of pair us with the lab. And we've had hit or miss with labs. We've had to switch labs if they're too slow, and it's a little bit of a trial and error because all these things are popping up sort of in the last, obviously, 6-8 months to deal with this. So.
And have you ever dealt with a mobile lab at all? A lab that comes to you?
we're actually carrying an Abbott machine on the HBO show Black Lady Sketch that starts on Monday. So we have a separate trailer for that machine and a separate like permit for a mobile lab that will sort of move with us. So that'll be my first experience.
Oh, good. You'll have to come back and let us know how it goes.
I mean, I just want to emphasize, it's so critical that, you know, your COVID team be completely separate from, you know, your producing and director team. I mean, I so appreciate that they're the ones making those decisions. And, you know, there was an executive I heard on another set who was like, this is ridiculous that we're wearing a face shield over our masks. And I was like, you know, I just would never want to be in that position. Like, it's not up to me what's ridiculous, you know? So, so we have a good team, and I really just do what they say.
Yeah.
Completely agree. We were told early on that one of our COVID compliance officers had done 2 shows, and we're like, what? And one went well and one didn't. I was like, what's the difference? And he was like, honestly, it's the top down. If the producers and the showrunners, if they follow the protocols and don't mess around, everyone else will do it. But if they slack off, then it's like an open season. So it really does start at the top with those kind of things.
Now, you know, last Friday we were shooting in a tiny beach house that was mostly being lit from the outside, and it was pouring rain. And we had just been told that if you were in the red zone, you had to wear face shields. So pouring rain and face shields were like, you know,
boy. You need like windshield wipers.
Yeah, no one did the damn thing. So, but the crew really like powered through it. They did it. They, you know, figured out whatever workarounds they could. And now we're talking to our COVID team, like, what do we do next time? Because that presented a different kind of unsafety.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know?
People not seeing.
So how do we, you know, how do we figure out?
How do we deal with the snow?
Yeah.
So, you know, those are the kinds of things we're dealing with.
We have a question from Michelle who's asking, do you feel your zone A keeps growing bigger? Most people that she's speaking to, her producers, are saying zone A kind of creeps bigger and bigger. And how does that work? Is it working okay? Is it being problematic if somebody tests positive in zone A?
I mean, we keep it fairly tight, and we let people in on an as-needed basis. Like, for instance, we need, maybe playback's not the best example, but like a day player type thing that we only need on set for a certain scene or something. We sort of test them for zone A, let them in, but then they don't stay in zone A.
Exactly.
So, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same. I have not had the experience yet of anybody testing positive, and maybe I won't. But we're also, I mean, we have a lot of, our COVID team also really regulates how many people can come into any said location. I mean, you know, and usually by the time you've got your actors and you've got your background and you've got your key crew, there isn't room for anybody else, red zone or not. I mean, it doesn't matter what your badge says, you can't go in there. So that's, I feel like that's keeping it fairly trim.
Great, great. And how big are your COVID teams?
There's a lot of them. Do you know, John? I don't know how big ours are.
I only know because we've said the one on our HBO series is 12 people.
I think 10 to 12 people sounds right to me.
Yeah.
You
Christine,
know,
this must be so different than your indie movies that you're one of the most prolific producers of independent films. So this must just feel like completely different with Netflix and 12, COVID people and everything. It's just.
I mean, I think COVID's going to feel different no matter what you're doing.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think if you want to have the whole conversation about how COVID is going to affect independent film, I think that's a whole other PGA Zoom.
Oh yeah.
And I'm happy to do it, but maybe this isn't the one, because
We
that's
should
a
definitely
whole,
do it though.
that is a whole other Megillah. Yes,
Right.
you're absolutely correct. When we're talking about a studio-based shoot, and where they can bake in the COVID protocols in a way that doesn't, and I think John said it's, 15 to 20% more. It absolutely is, with a combination of paying for the team and reducing the hours. And, a $2 to $20 million independent film most likely will not have that,
Right.
will not have the ability to do that. But as I said, that's a whole other thing, and that's not what we're talking about today.
How do you, Christine, how do you find the job of producer, just time-wise? Do you spend your time differently on a COVID set than pre-COVID? And if so, like, where are the differences?
For me, I would say I try and stay off the set, because there's such a limited number of people who can really be there comfortably. There's no video village anymore. We have iPads, and we watch the shoot in real time that way. The thing I have to work a little harder at is when you do have access to the set, you can get a better sense of what the dynamics are, and start to sort of see, oh, okay, this is an issue. I can see something brewing between the DP and the production designer, or the director, or the AD, or what have you. And now I sort of have to rely a little bit more on being caught up between setups, between, as we move from scene to scene. It's just different. I don't know that it's like one is worse than the other. It's more, I always feel like you can't be an absent producer, because you have to have your ear to the ground to understand what those things are, depending on the kind of producer you are. And now I just have to be a little bit more inventive in how I figure out how to make that happen.
Got it. And John, do you spend your time differently?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I took a course in COVID safety, and then did all these protocols, versions and versions of protocols. But I'm not as on the ground on any of these shows, so I'm sort of just here as a resource, and working from one stationary position to sort of problem solve and help them, because it is different on set. So I'm trying to help our teams as much as I can remotely.
Got it. And BD's asking, do you guys stay in a trailer near set, or are you staying home?
I'm either in the trailer or right next to set.
Got it.
And again, like, sometimes Pam and I say to each other, well, why are we even here? We can't really be there. But I think part of it is it's a big deal for the talent to see you there.
Right.
They're the ones taking off their masks, and going in there and doing it. And so I kind of feel like it's important for the talent to see, the producers that they've been in it with from the beginning there. And I also, as I said before, I think there's a real, you don't really get to understand the dynamic and help adjust it if you're not there. Even with the whole like COVID protocols, where there are some days where everyone's like, I can't wear it. I can't wear this. It's, I can't see what I'm doing. And you want to be in it so that you can sort of help figure out, a solution that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially, I mean, look at the studio execs who made the protocols were there. We'd all feel better. So being producers, we need to be there in their stead.
That's right.
And John, are you near set as well? Are you on set?
No, haven't been yet. I mean, I'm based in New York, so I'm closest to Younger, but since we have shows shooting in LA, New York, and London, I'm sort of overseen from a central hub.
Got it. Darren's asking a very specific question on budgeting. How are PPE and COVID safety items being budgeted? What category line item? How are we estimating them? And do they go in line items in each various category?
I can jump in if you like, Lori, because I've been in the middle of budgeting several large shows, mostly nonfiction, but I think we handle it about the same way. And as you're going through, you can budget them all, but in Movie Magic, I group them so that they can be pulled out and we can identify them as COVID expenses as opposed to operating expenses for the show. And for instance, if you're adding extra days or extra weeks because you have to extend the shoot, we can group those into the COVID or group them separately. And in some cases where it's an AMPTP show, I'm also identifying projected contingency costs and keeping that separate from the expenses, because you'll have COVID expenses that you'll spend no matter what. And then you'll have contingency costs in case there is a quarantine or a shutdown, and those are separated out as well. That way the network or the studio can can look at it separately and identify, well, this is what the show costs, and this is what our expanded costs are for COVID.
Yeah, I can tell you also that using an allow is not a good thing in a budget these days. They will, the people, either SAG or the unions, whoever's looking through your COVID protocols for the set, are going to match it up against a budget. And if you don't have numbers that match, they're going to assume that you're not really being diligent about that. So make sure that they're actual numbers and not just allowances. Good question. Okay. And how are any of you guys doing anything in the post side of things yet?
Our post is all remote right now. We have several shows editing.
Us too.
Yeah. We had some shows that finished shooting and did post at the beginning of quarantine, again, all remote. But yeah, it's
Got it. Yeah, it seems like most post-production setups are. I don't know how on our shows we had some pretty big hurdles to overcome in terms of the safety of transferring all the materials and all of that. So you have to have pretty strong protocols in place in terms of how people can transfer and share files. But once that's out of the way, it seems a little more seamless in terms of the post-production side of things. And did you have to do any kind of rewriting of your scripts or of the projects before you went back into production? Or are you finding you're doing that on the fly at all? Or
you know, we adjusted, I would say, more than rewrote. We really, the director took a real magnifying glass to everything we were doing and kind of figured out what would make the most sense given what, as we sort of learned what the challenges would be.
Yeah, I agree with that. We did a variety, mix of things, but there was a little rewriting on everything. I mean, the big conversation that happened with shows that were in the middle of writing is, how much do we acknowledge COVID, depending on what the show is. Obviously, it wouldn't have a period show, but we have a lot of modern day shows, and it's like, how do we do this? And obviously, if people have seen the promos, The Conners deals with it head on, as it does every topic, and it works well for that show. Other shows, it just doesn't fit into the creative, and so different shows are treating it differently.
got it. And would either of you do, like, if you were starting a show tomorrow, a new show, is there something you think, oh gosh, I'm going to do this differently? I'm going to start with this, or I'm going to.
I mean, I feel like now we get a lot of scripts, potential projects that pitch themselves as being COVID friendly, like, fewer people, more contained locations. I'm trying not to sort of make my focus only be that kind of material, but inevitably, you think about it. I mean, especially if you've been through a show like John has, and like we are starting to be, and you see the costs and you see like, what takes time, the idea of something that is more, that can simply be shot more efficiently because of what it organically is becomes more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It has to fit the material. Like, you can't force it to be something it's not. So if it works creatively for it to be more COVID friendly, then great. But if you're trying to just like cut stuff down to try to get it shot, it's inevitably going to be a disaster.
Right. Or do the next Zoom show.
Right. Done those.
Well, we just have a couple more minutes. Any last minute advice you want to give to our producers on set about shooting during this these crazy COVID times?
I mean, I'll just say that what I keep telling everyone is trust the medical professionals you hire. I mean, we're not doctors. We're just people making TV shows at the end of the day. So we should always take the health and safety as the main priority of what we're doing. And that's why we're hiring these medical professionals to get us through until we have some solution to this.
Thank you. Christine?
No, I think, I agree with that 1,000,000%. I feel like, John, you're further along than we are. We're literally only in week 2. And, with every major disruption like this is, I just say, like, look for the opportunity, look for a way, like if we can figure out a way to make our practices more efficient and better, then let's do it, so we'll see.
Great. John, Christine, thank you so much. I know you both are busy right in the middle of it, and I appreciate you guys coming on. I know that you, one or both of you have to jump off quickly, but thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. And Christine, I'm going to call you about that indie production.
Me too.
We definitely need that one.
Guys.
So, thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And Rasha, I saw you like nodding vigorously during a lot of the conversation. So
I was writing down the tips. I was learning.
Yeah, right. Maybe you could just start off by letting us know what you're working on, what you were working on,
Sure.
a little idea of the hurdles you've hit, and then I'm sure we're going to start getting lots of questions coming up. So.
Yeah, no, again, appreciate you having me on. March 17th, I think, is the date we've all kind of circled. If we look back on our calendars, it was the day that we were all ordered to go home. And at the time we had 8 series in various stages of production. So pre-production, casting, field production, and then certainly post. And, there's only gonna be a couple weeks, no problem. We'll get through this and we'll be back to the way of doing things. And we obviously know the end of that story. But it really impacted our field teams the most, because we do shows called Night Watch and Pit Bulls and Prolees and transplant unit, and so they're in Nashville and New Orleans, and we have crews in Miami and up in the Bay Area. So how do we get them home? How do we get them there? Became a big challenge for us. The kind of joke about post, I was a former editor. Editors didn't even notice there was a pandemic because
right.
locked up. They're like, what pandemic?
Yeah.
But you're right. Everything that's been said earlier about post being all remote, you just need a real big server room and the content being able to flow. Pretty safe from a standpoint of operations. But it's, how do you get a crew across country? Is it safe to get on a plane? When they land, what do they do? Do they quarantine and so on? That became, I think at the very beginning, we had this is our protocols. And then, 2 weeks later, oops, here's our new protocols, because they kept changing with the CDC and the state and the cities that we're working in. So we started to really study the bubbles, they were starting to bubble up at the time. Certainly the NBA had an amazingly successful run at actually completing a season. I don't think they had a case, which is really incredible. We were looking at Tyler Perry's, had some protocols in Atlanta, his complex in Atlanta, and really strict, but really, smart. They were dealing with everything that they could possibly think of, from crafty, which we discussed, to, what happens, you can create a bubble for work, but what happens when people go home to the hotel or to their homes? How do you carry that strictness or compliance to home life so they don't bring it back into this environment? So it was a challenge, but I think the latest case, we kind of broke it down into 3 parts. One is compliance. Because we're working in so many states, we have to be really up to speed on, what is the county and city, what are they, purple, are they red, are they yellow, where are the spikes happening, to kind of, because that changes on a national level almost daily. Obviously the protocols, for sure, what Christine and John were talking about, many of the same things hit us. And then, testing, for sure. I mean, we test so much, our tests are getting tested, if like it's really important, because, however you set up, if you're setting up a project, whether it's an independent film or a production remotely, people really, your stakeholders really have to buy into your protocols, because if there's any doubt coming from the top that maybe this may or may not work, or, you really need, the network, the insurance companies, your cast and crew, all to feel like, what, this is going to keep us safe. So we've gone pretty above and beyond, kind of trying to figure out what that would be. And, we made some errors along the way. It was, John said it earlier, we're producers, not doctors. So at the very beginning, hey, give a PA a thermometer and a questionnaire. That sounds like it's pretty good. And we realized, that's not going to fly. So totally agree with the panelists who talked about employing risk management companies who will then bring to your set a medical professional, and their job 24/7 is to be there to do all the protocols, right? And if someone has a scratchy throat or is worried maybe, something's going on, they can give full-on medical advice that just gives everybody a peace of mind, which is really critical to these shows.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And can you talk a little bit about, you said you do some farming out of your productions out of the country, and most of them are in country right now. Is that?
Yeah. 90% are here. We had to do some recreations for one of the series we were doing. It was just too risky to do it here, but we found out through our sister company that there was a company in Prague. The testing was going well. They had low cases of COVID. So we sent them a shot list, and kind of, their reel looked good. Language barrier was pretty good. Crossed our fingers, but we got back, these are sections of a recreation that we needed, and it turned out really, really well. But the rest of the material, when we first, this was kind of interesting, when we first started to figure out how do we travel and how do we we do a lot of interviews in the field. And so our producer and camera crews, we're pretty small. I was commenting on the scale of Christine and John's shows. I mean, they have, 120 people. We may have 8 for a show, right? So we can't travel our crews. So, necessity is the mother of invention. So our camera team came up with what we would call like fly packs, right? And basically it's a Pelican case, and in the Pelican case, there's a camera and a ring light and a lavalier and a computer. And then let's say we're filming an interview in Nashville, we would ship it, and we would hire an AC there to pick it up, go to the subject's home, set it up, and then they would leave and go outside. And then our producer from Burbank could remote in to ask the interviews, right? And we also had an app where our cameraman could remote in to test and check the lighting and the focus and so on. And you know what? It looked really good. And I felt bad because, it's kind of joking to our DP, like this might, replace you guys because this is looking as good as when we send, you know, real humans. But that was a phase there where we couldn't travel. Now it's much better. We can actually send crews per our protocols to be safe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And when you're traveling people now, what are your testing protocols? Like to go from here to another state or vice versa?
Yeah, so again, we check on compliance. We check to see, you know, is this a hot zone? Is it, you know, which level, threat level is it, which is first and important. We test before we go. We test when they land, and they quarantine usually for 2 to 4 days while we set up, whether it's a hotel or in some cases, we've even done Airbnbs. It's pretty strict. We're doing a show now for A&E called Night Watch. And unlike most shows that want to go away from COVID, this is a show that follows EMTs, you know, paramedics, and as they, you know, answer calls at night. And in some cases, calls that patients who have COVID. So it's basically, you know, setting up a protocol system that keeps our crews safe, that works within the compliance of the EMS group in New Orleans. But it's complicated. It's a challenge because you never know. Like, you know, it's not a shiny floor show on a stage where you just create a bubble. Here, they're racing to a possible patient who might have complications. So that one has been real challenging for us to set up.
Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
That's amazing. We have a couple. Someone is asking, but maybe you'll know this, Rasha. Melissa's asking, how are we cleaning camera equipment? Is there something safer than alcohol?
Oh, excellent question. You know, I don't know the products that our teams are using, but it is something that's constant. And, you know, it's also on that Night Watch show, because, you know, we have mounted cameras in various places. You know, you're swabbing and exchanging and backing up our equipment quite a bit. I'm not sure what the product is called, but it is something that I'm sure through necessity has become a very popular product in the production community.
Melissa, what we'll do is we'll find out and put it on productiontips.org.
Yeah.
Rasha, if you could get it to us, we'll
Sure.
post that for you, Melissa. Good question. Good question. And do you have any standby crew for your key roles?
Yeah. Great question. And that's something that, you know, this all kind of gets into cost. You know, our budgets are obviously a little bit more challenging in non-scripted, but the networks are stepping up. And one of the things we built in, our crews, we're kind of dividing our crews. Our crews are pretty small. It's you know, cameraman, audio, producer, and AP kind of, it's a configuration of 4. We've created kind of pods in the field, right? So just like, you know, you're finding today with families having school pods and so on, it's the same principle, right? They know each other, they know where everybody's been, they look out for each other, they kind of socially distance, eat and work together and so on. It seems to be working really well so far because we haven't had any cases. But what if somebody tests positive, right? So we've kind of mirrored almost a shadow group, you know, that tests on the same cycles as our A group, just in case, you know, something happens to our A crew, they can kind of step in knowing that they're okay. So it's something we just started down in New Orleans. You know, it is an extra cost, certainly, but it just prepares us for, you know, the worst case scenario in case something happens.
That's great.
Are all of your shows insured by the networks or the studio?
Yeah, they are. And generally, most of them have been really supportive of, you know, earlier there was some questions about budgeting and how does it earmarked and so on. How do you bind your insurance? How do you get, you know, how do you mark your category in the budget for COVID? You know, some of the smaller networks, a little more challenging, a little bit more, you guys figured out, which, you know, not a great answer, but to the major networks, I mean, Netflix is amazingly supportive, A&E, same way, They've been, make sure whatever it costs, we need to make sure we're, so for example, for some of these risk management or COVID compliance officers, you have a floating scale there. It could be 500 a day, and I've seen all the way up to 1,200 a day for this person. And you multiply that by how many weeks, it's a cost, right?
Yeah,
sure.
So we've really, knock on wood, so far been very happy with how we've been supported by the networks and insurance and everything.
That's great. Are you finding that there's kind of a general percentage that you're adding to the budget just for COVID?
Yeah, it is. Right now it's lower. I know John's mentioned something like 20 or 30%. I think he said something like that. For us, it's less. I want to say it's probably closer to 10 to 15%, but it's you just have to do it, right? And it's the peace of mind. And again, like I said earlier, having a risk manager on set to be a professional at what they do, so we can do what we can do. Crews are, we're all human beings. You have people at home who are possibly older or maybe immune compromised. So everybody, needs to work, wants to work, and so on. But how do they, and if you can create an environment where they feel safe and they can relate that, it's just fantastic for morale alone.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, risk manager is so much more common in unscripted. We usually have a risk assessment before we go out on any with most of our location shoots. It's a lot different in the scripted world. We don't usually have that. So I think it's something that hopefully the scripted world will adopt from us, because it gives you just that much more sense of assurity that there's someone looking out just for those, those bigger issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you dealt with, someone's asking, saying that there are a lot of day players out there, whether it's hair and makeup or grip, that are like, they're getting tested every day themselves just so they can be a day player on different shoots. And are you happy to use those kind of people?
Yes, absolutely. It's not ideal, but at the same time, we're covering those costs. And at the same time, if something does happen, they can move right in. So we don't really have as much in the hair and makeup world, but certainly, from a, AC to, DP to, the kind of roles that we fall into. Yes, it's really important that we have that backup. We're doing that.
Rasha, let me ask, are any of your shows larger shows, like multi-camera, studio or remotes?
Yeah, nothing that's under the term multicam. We might have a 2-camera field shoot that for coverage, but that's pretty big for us. It's usually singles on shots and so on. So our crew configuration, Pitbull's probably has a crew of 25 total, but that's office and field and then post, which is all done here in LA. So it's pretty lean,
Yeah.
And have you had anyone test positive yet? And what did you do in those circumstances?
Yeah, we did. So in Pitbull's show travels quite a bit. So we had traveled from Louisiana to Texas and took all the precautions in the world and filmed in Houston for a couple days, came back to Louisiana. One of our producers started showing signs and was tested. So positive. So, we did our contact tracing. It's just really trying to figure out where she might have been able to contract it, but we quarantined for 2 weeks. And fortunately, it wasn't a spreader event or any of that kind of thing. We were able to get everybody back. So it's fortunately, because the amount of production we have going on right now, that was our only, case of a positive test.
Right. And did the network pick up the cost to shut down for 2 weeks? And did you have to pay everyone? What was that?
Well, what was nice about that is that we have, A, B, and C teams. So let's say this was the A team, the B and C team who hadn't traveled could continue to work. So the A group, it's kind of talking about the pod mentality. They shut down for 2 weeks. So the show kept going, which was very helpful.
And did it change the attitude of the crew after they had to shut down, did they take everything so much more seriously?
Yes, yes.
Right.
Yes,
I would think so, but I'd hope so, right?
yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, that's kind of human nature is maybe at the beginning, you know, we had an issue for a while with the masks. You know, our cameraman was fogging up and we tried the visor thing and we tried this thing and so on. And then, you know, finally got to a point where it was, you know, this is serious stuff. We're sorry that your lens is steaming, but we can get around that. The bigger issue is, you know, our safety. So everything did change. And I want to say by and large, everybody's got to go back to that buying into the protocols. If everybody feels like there's a reason for this, it's kind of gets back to creating a safe working environment. There's less complaining or issues there.
Right.
And everyone was paid while they were off. Everyone was paid while.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How are you finding the testing in the field? Are you finding places that can do the testing? Are you having any trouble finding that?
Yeah, no, we aren't. I mean, with Night Watch, we're basically, you know, with EMS. So they're you know, it's the couldn't think of a better group to be working with when it comes to that. So the rapid test, we test Tuesdays and Fridays. And like I said, we have shadow crews that do the same kind of testing just in case something happens. For other shows, you know, we're primarily doing the rapid testing, the kind of 30-minute response time, probably about twice a week as well in the field. But it, again, knock on, you know what, it's working out so far.
And do you do any in-lab testing in the field? Or you?
Not so much. You know, we've kind of determined, because our shows are pretty fluid and people are moving from city to city and town to town, that it's maybe for the shows that are going to be there a longer period, we'll probably implement that. But for kind of the set up, film, and leave, it just didn't seem like it was practical at the time.
You have like shorter, like a day or 2 day shoots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems, yeah.
Stan is asking, what's the PGA position on blood samples as a way of testing? If it's an antigen test, it's okay as an addition to PCR testing, but PCR testing right now is the only, through a lab, is the only approved way, at least from the Producers Guild point of view, for testing out in the field. There's also blood sample that can give you antibody tests, but those are also not approved and not SAG approved. Thank you, Stan.
Were you experiencing a lot of false positives, Russia, you know, in some of the testing? Because we've heard from other productions that one of the real challenges was the first test would be either a false positive or, you know, negative, and then they had to test again. And
no, it's so true. And it's confusing because it's, you know, the symptoms are there, you know, the test comes out and then you kind of go, okay, they have it. And then it's you know, a false positive. So it does have us run around a little bit. We're super conservative when it comes to that. So anything at all that involves that, we definitely quarantine the folks for the appropriate time. But yeah, it is part of, again, figuring out how to deal with it. And you know, lesser important, you have a schedule, a budget, and, you know, obviously you want quality on the screen, but at the same time, that's secondary compared to how to figure out how do you make it work. You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
And how long are your typical shoots in duration, and then within it, the actual time you're actually shooting on camera?
So our, it's, you know, let's see, 8-hour days, 5 days a week, sometimes staggered, multiple crews. You know, Night Watch is a night show. So that one goes from, I want to say 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. Very, you know, kind of vampire hours, as they say. But, you know, a production could be on a minimal, could be like we were talking about, a day, you land, shoot, and move, to a longer term, like a Night Watch could be there set up for about a year. Pitbulls is seasonal. You know, we were there to dodge 6 hurricanes on top of COVID.
Wow.
You know, you guys have seen all the hurricanes that were headed, and they all kind of veered off at the last minute. New Orleans got missed, but, you know, so if it's not, you know, the COVID, it's the weather. But yeah, so every show kind of, that's the challenge, is to, you know, every show kind of has a different rhythm, different staff size, different complexities, but you know, that's kind of how we're dealing with it. Yeah.
And given all the new, I mean, I just know from our unscripted shows, my UPM and my EIC were just like shocked at how much extra time that it took to set up getting the right COVID compliance officers and making, you know, checking, like it's really hard to call people and say, how did they do? Because there's not a whole lot. It's all new to everyone. So, and just making sure and feel that's happening. Has this affected the number of shows you might think about taking on in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, honestly, with us, it's, I mean, that part of our filter is, you know, I mean, is it something that could be produced? And for the network, you know, some of the budgets are so low, we like to say, you want audio with this show, because it's really a challenge. But so we weigh the COVIDness of it all is an extra factor we weigh into, you know, kind of the gravy to grief. You know, if there's more gravy than grief, then it's probably worth pursuing. But with COVID, man, that grief scale starts to outweigh it. And we have to make some, you know, difficult decisions where we normally would have said, hey, this is great, let's move forward with it. Now we're saying, like, let's really think it through, because setup and compliance and all the kind of things that we need to do will make this either cost prohibitive, or we just can't guarantee we can do this. We're using this company we like a lot. I'm not affiliated with them, but they're called Global Film Solutions, GFS. I think John mentioned they were working with another group. They're very good. They came from kind of global risk management, and you know, this was like the perfect segue for them to kind of you know, work now on a pandemic. But they're expensive, you get what you pay for, but really super pros. So for anybody who's interested, I can kind of pass on a link and they can.
That would be great.
Yeah, they're great.
We'd love to put it on productiontips.org. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. And do you have a position? I know on our unscripted shows, we have people sign liability waivers just in terms of, like, you know, we're rock climbing and you might, you know, you have to like sign away the issue that, you know, this is a risky, but we're not putting anything in that's COVID related. Are you doing that? Are you asking?
No, not COVID related, but certainly in some of our shows, you know, we do some shows that are, you know, risky as well, you know, like Night Watch. So we have to make sure there's a hold harmless release in case, you know, something happens in the field, but not from a COVID standpoint. No.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And are you, so do you have any advice for the people that are listening? Boy, I'm losing my voice. Let's say they have an unscripted show, they're getting ready to go out and pitch it, like anything that they should say to the network or not say to the network in terms of this whole COVID thing? And
yeah, that's an excellent question. I want to say in April through July, everything was, second word is COVID friendly, right? This is a show that can be done without shooting anything or editing anything. Like, it was just like ridiculous. It's a show about nothing. We love it, right? That's kind of gone out now, because there's been some really great material out there that's being produced today. I mean, there's you can kind of watch shows, whatever your favorite shows on the various streamers or platforms, you can kind of get a sense of, oh, this is PC, pre-COVID, or, you know, COVID, just by like, you know, exteriors or how people are positioned. But, you know, the good news for producers or anybody out there pitching is that networks are really, you know, they kind of stockpiled a lot of reruns, obviously a lot of things going on in 2020. It's kind of a wash year while everybody was figuring everything we're talking about out. But now there's an appetite, a very strong appetite to find programming, except for Quibi, find programming for 21. Sorry, I had to throw that in. We started talking about that earlier. How's that for, we got two projects there. I guess that's going to go well. Figuring out program for 21, like Q2, Q3. So it's a great time to be going out and not to be afraid of the subject matter. If it's a field show, if it's global, if it's, you know, high-end budgets, whatever else it is, there's less network execs kind of going, how are you going to do that? Now they're getting a sense of turning the corner on it. So I think it's a great time to be out pitching.
Good. I bet you that everyone's good to hear. Get
Yeah.
get your pitching chops ready, guys.
Exactly.
Get out there. Where do you think the unscripted world is going these days? Do you think it's going to be the same kind of follow reality? Have you seen any trends that you want to?
Probably more lighthearted stuff. I've noticed, we do some hard edge projects, in the prison space or in the, crime space or so on. I think there's a tendency now to kind of, and this goes cyclically, in 3 months, it'll be bring us the rough stuff,
Right.
I want to say, the next Marie Kondo, the next, Top Chef, those kind of seem to be, from a psychological standpoint, shows that feel right for networks. At least that's what we found. Kind of the experiment shows, maybe not as much, but I want to say, yeah, they're the shows that kind of track really well right now. At least that's what we're finding out. So
Great. That's good to hear. It's certainly the kind of thing I want to be seeing right
Yeah,
now.
me too.
Something
Me
that I
too.
can
I know.
sit back,
Please.
be happy.
Exactly.
So Rasha, I really, really appreciate you joining us. Is there any last minute advice you have or last words of advice before we
No,
sign out today?
well, thank you for having me on. I think this is such an informative and important panel or information session to give to producers. And, it is a great business that we're in and we're figuring it out. Damn it, we're not doctors,
Yes.
we're producers. But, communication, collaboration, really important, learn something from anybody else. And it is a great time, again, to be a producer out there because this will pass someday. And, let's get back to doing what we do best.
Great.
Amen. Rasha, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, this will be up on our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. So if you want to pass it on to your friends and family, please do. So thank you. Thank you, Rasha. Everyone have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.